David's quite a unique character, quite a unique personality. I remember my first or second day on set. We were setting up, it was early in the morning, and David said, geez, I had a dream last night. And I said, really? Well, what was it about? And he started to talk, and I noticed how everyone sort of drifted away, and it was just me standing there, and his assistant at the time. And he told this dream, he said, well, I dreamt that I was a praying mantis, and I was eating my hand and parts of my body and vomiting into the sand. I was in this kind of Sahara kind of landscape, he said, and I kept eating on myself and vomiting in the sand. And I was this big kind of bug. He said, and then this sandstorm came up, he says, and blew until I couldn't see anything. And when the sandstorm subsided, he says, there was a gentle breeze that blew the sand away, and where the vomit of this insect was me, David, laying naked in the sand. And I went, yeah, okay. I'm gonna go over here now. And we went off, and but 2 days later, David was on set, and I heard somebody say to him, how you doing? He says, oh, I had a dream last night. And they said, oh, what was it about? And when I walked away with everyone else, because I remember all day long looking at David that day, he told me about his dream, thinking, this accountant-looking kind of camp counselor has some pretty bizarre dreams and kind of ways of looking at the universe. And I didn't really want to go there. And I'm not saying it, I remember that day was like, that's not of any use to me. You know, I wanted him to be this safe, sane. I want to be the crazy one. I want to push the limits out. I want to know that the leader, you know, might be leading us into the deep end. But, and like I said, time is truth. David's proven over and over again that not only does he have an interesting aspect of the universe and the inner universe, but he's willing to do almost, if not partially, all of his emotional laundry in public. I got called in for a film called, I don't think it was called Scanners. The working title was not Scanners, for a man named David Cronenberg. At that time, I didn't know who David Cronenberg was. I had seen The Brood and loved it. Absolutely loved The Brood. I was raised on science fiction. And there was a camera set up and everything like that, and David was there, and this very middle class, very safe, very large-eyed looking individual was sitting there. He was more like a guidance counselor than a film director, and talked me through this one sequence that we were going to do and audition with. And it was, if you've seen the film, or if anyone's seen the film, of course you have, because this is on the DVD. It's the scene where Revok is in the black and white flashback film, and his half-brother or brother is being shown the footage of him. And that was the only scene that I think was in the original script that the character was being hired for. So David told me that these were kind of a misunderstood, kind of malcontent, socially unacceptable character who is now incarcerated. And so I did the audition, and he really got off on it, said he liked it. And I found out later that afternoon that they were interested. And I didn't pay much attention to it, to tell you the truth, other than the fact it was going to be shot in Montreal. I think it was about my 19th or 20th actual production or film at that time I'd done. And in Canada at the time, we pretty well got scale plus 10 in everything we did. Foreign actors would come in and get a lot of money, and the homegrown actors would sort of like be the carrots, peas, and possible the parsley around the turkey. And that's what I thought this would be. Went to Montreal, started doing it. By the time I got to Montreal and we started to do it, the part had gotten enlarged slightly. David was kind of writing it on the run. I don't know, I've talked to other people who said they've never heard that before, but the way I was told it, was informed by David on set when I got to Montreal. He said that the part's been increased. We're going to tell more of his backstory and more of his present story. And that the film was originally structured where Larry Dane, the character, the head of security for Gonsack, was, he was more of a leading character at the time, and David wanted to make it more familial, more paternal, more guilt-driven, I think, familial guilt-driven. And so he started increasing Revok's character. And I basically played Darryl as kind of a political fringe, I don't want to give any kind of left-wing political group any kind of nod, but I played it, I came from a union household. My father was a union, he came from very poor, we were poor. 5 kids, east end of Toronto. The house was row housing, it was only 12.5 feet wide. My dad used to say you could fart in the kitchen and smell it in the front bedroom, and it was so true. Very loving household though. And so I understood the idea of rebellion. I understood the idea of standing up for what you want. And that's what I took into Darryl Revok. That's what I took into that character. Filled with all the passion of a young actor and the ignorance. And I don't mean stupidity, I mean the lack of experience ignorance, which was wonderful. I think that character needed some of that, to have some of that bravado. It certainly worked.
You sound just like him. Like Ruth.
No, not like him. Like Revok! Darryl Revok!
No. Like him.
My daughter told me just recently that I've done 250 features or something, or productions. Yeah, she's been on IMDb. I'm afraid to. The problem with IMDb is all your indiscretions and everything show up there, and the jobs you take based on fear of finances or career and stuff. They all show up there. There's some of them are indefensible, but with David is probably one of a handful of people I've worked with that I would call a director, who knows what he wants, has a skill set to get it, not only technically, but on an emotional, mental, physical, spiritual level too. Also his sets, his material is very bizarre. I only have the experience of working with him on scanners, but he made the actor's environment safe. It wasn't some place where you were afraid of being ridiculed if you took a risk with something. Without that sense of safety on the set, without that sense of approval from the storyteller, I don't think I would have given it everything I got. I don't think, you know what I mean? It's like, there's a part of you, and all of us, I think, that edits ourselves, that goes, watch out that you're going too far. You know, somebody's gonna go, fuck, what are you doing? You know, and David was sort of like, can we try this? Can we try that? He massaged and made it a safe place to do those things. He made it a safe place to take risks, to bring the childlike behavior, childlike, not childish, but childlike behavior, that joy of creation out. And I loved working with him, you know, and everyone felt it. And I think that comes from strong leadership. When you have a strong storyteller who has a strong and competent skill set, everyone around it is under, you know, it works then. The pyramid of authority and everything works. It's when that person that's at the lead doesn't have a skill set, or you don't feel confident, that everything starts to crumble and all the little pyramids start pulling at each other. David he's great with his own material, he's great with other people's material, he's proven that. Time is truth.
At this point, I'd like to call for volunteers. Fine.
We came to that scene because we had done that bust. Dick Smith had made this bust, and Stéphane Dupuis had done the bust and made this head, and quite a good head and everything like that. But when they told me they were going to do it, I said, well, how are you going to blow the head up? And he said, well, we're going to take a 10-gauge shotgun and we're going to put it behind. The head will be here, and then the brain will be all chicken livers and hamburger and dog food. and we'll put the shotgun behind it, and we'll shoot it up and blow the head out this way, and it should flop and do everything. And I said, well, where I'll be? He said, well, you'll be sitting beside it. And I went, uh-huh. Actors have a tendency to be accommodating. Like, it's all right, my hand's broken, but I'll go to the hospital after the shot. Or, you know, oh, I'm bleeding. Can we just get the shot done? So they don't want to, there's a little boy inside me. And I was so proud of myself. I sat there and I said, I saw them putting up all the plexiglass and plywood to protect the two cameras. And I went, I want $1 million insurance policy. And they all said, what? I remember Claudia Roux came to the set and said, you want what? I said, if I'm going to sit beside somebody getting their head blown off with a shotgun, I want insurance. They said, well, we can't get that. We're about to shoot. I said, well, then I'm not sitting here. I said, and they said, what do you? I said, I'm not. And they went off, and I said, all right, fine. And they put the two cameras on Louis Del Grande's character sitting there going, when they got to the actual shooting of the head, blowing the head off. When the shot was over, the shotgun was from behind and down. The pellets from the shotgun blew, it's great, it blows the head up. I think they did another one that wasn't as good, but the first one worked wonderfully. But the pellets ricocheted off the plywood and the plexiglass, and the chair I was sitting in was embedded with pellets. And I remember sitting there looking at it afterwards, and everyone saying, hey, that was great, look at this shot. They're all, you know, taking pictures of this blown up thing and everything like that. And I was looking at the chair and the desk where I had been sitting, which was just off camera. And the flags that were there for the lighting and stuff. And there was holes in the flags, paint chips on the desk, and where the chair had been was just, everything had, and I was like, I remember going, you saved your face. Nobody else thought about it. You saved, you know. Young, inspired actor saves face. That was my own headline inside. Yeah, I would have been messed up pretty bad. We shot the ending of the film, I think Christmas Eve, or the day before, 23rd of December. And then re-upped, I think in May, the first week of May, or late April, if I remember it. Again, this is 30 some odd years ago, but it was in the spring. And we started shooting again because they rewrote a new ending. The first ending was very pyrotechnic, and Stephen's character had a lot of electrical fires coming out of his head, and his stunt double. And David asked Dick Smith, the way I'm told, he sent what he had to the cut he had of the ending to Dick Smith and said, can you help me with this? Is there anything you could suggest or we could do together? And Dick Smith, who had been doing Altered States at the time, which was on again, off again, changed directors, he had designed this whole bladder, makeup bladders, which were layers of urethane makeup that you put on that have chambers in them. You could fill them full of blood and have them start swinging, or you could puff them up with air and contort somebody, which he did usually, later on he used in Altered States. But the first time he said, yeah, I've got some stuff. So between David Cronenberg and Dick Smith, they rewrote the ending around what was possible with the special effects makeup. And we came back in May to shoot that new ending. When I get hit with the statue, when Stephen hits me with that brown little cubic sculpture, I always think of it as the Thing from the Fantastic Four. No! He picks up and hits me with it. When he hits me with it, it's December 22nd. When I get up off the floor, I think it's May 1st or May 2nd, when I stand up and look at the blood and look at him.
All right, we're gonna do it the scanner way. I'm gonna suck your brain dry.
The most creative thing I can say about Dick Smith is that I looked more horrific without makeup at that time than I did with the makeup on. I had jumped in the wrong end of a swimming pool at a party, a late night party, and without the lights on, and completely taken off the left side of my face. The 2 days before we were supposed to start shooting. So I showed up in Montreal with all of this road rash here, my cheeks, along the edge of my nose, and down around my chin. I just literally, I was with an actor named Winston Record, who is no longer with us, and we were having a pretty good time running amok. So I show up to do this reshoot, And David and Pierre David and everyone looked at me and went, profanity. And so they sent me over to Dick Smith, who had set up in Old Montreal with Stéphane Dupuis, who's a junior makeup artist at that time. Not junior, but he wasn't world known. He hadn't won an Academy Award yet. And Dick was in his studio, and I walked in and Dick looked at it and he went, yeah, I can work with that, we'll be fine. So what he literally did is he had to make my face look normal and cover all this up with latex for that whole sequence from the time I get up off the floor and say, brothers should be close, don't you think? That is all latex on one side of my face, not just the bladders. It's just to make me look like I had in the rest of the film. And so he did a masterful job covering up all the road rash.
Brothers should be close, don't you think?
Which wasn't very pretty because it would all get gooey underneath the latex and it took forever to heal after we finished shooting. But I had white scleras put in, which are, large, and they put me that one sequence where I'm screaming and I rage and I tilt my head up. There's a flame bar, a gas flame bar at my feet to simulate the actual burning of Stephen Lack's character and stuff. And when we were shooting that sequence, Dick had to step off set, Dick Smith, because he had put the scleras in and the makeup and everything. And some makeup assistant, I couldn't see because I'm blind with those white scleras on. And I went, my eyes are hurting. And what Dick would do is he'd blow some air and some fluid behind them and slowly bring them off because the flame bar dries the scleras out, and so they stick to your eyes. And I said, and I didn't know, I thought I was talking to Dick, and all of a sudden I felt this hand. I said, who is this? And they stuck a plunger on it and tried to spin the sclera off and scratched all my coronary, on my left eye. And she was right-handed. And we had to shoot for the next 3 days with those contact lenses and everything. Nothing would fit. So we had to, because the eye they had to take me to a clinic. They shoot all this anesthetic in your eye. They put a eyepiece on. They put abrasive powder in and then fluid, and then they sand the top of your lens. And they had to take these burrs off my lens on my left eye. And they're still there. There's still scars there. When I get tired, I get to see them. But what happened was when we shot the ending of me in the corner and I rolled out behind Stephen's coat and say, with Stephen's voice, because they dub it later on, Kim, it's me.
It's me, Kim. Cameron. I'm here.
The contact lenses that were made to match Stephen Lack did not fit on my eyes because my eye had swollen and was abrased. So Dick Smith says, I think I've got a solution. And he said, try these. And he put these contacts, hand-painted contact lenses in. And he said, you can't see through them, but they're old school. They're old hand-painted lenses. But he says they're softer at the back because the paint was on them. And he says they won't adhere to the... And they were comfortable enough to do that scene, but I had to do it blind when I roll out from behind that coat. He told me after the scene was over and we were taking them off, he came in to take them off and he was smiling. I said, what's funny? He said, those are Dustin Hoffman's eyes from Little Big Man. And I went, what? He says, I just happened to have him in my kit. The old man, when we did the prosthetic old man scenes, we wanted his eyes more milky and white. So when Revok comes out from behind that coat using Stephen Lack's voice, he has Dustin Hoffman's eyes. So there is some of me there.
We've won. We've won.
I can't remember the first time I saw Scanners. I do remember getting my first trip to Europe out of it because David was looking after the Berlin Film Festival, I think, and Stephen Lack went to London, and I got Madrid, which is pretty good for a kid from the East End of Toronto. I was supposed to go into London after it, and my memory's kind of foggy here, but I was also drinking. I haven't drank in 32 years, but I was indulging a lot in those days, young man that I was. And I had the two people with me. One was a very, very frightened, neurotic man, press secretary, and this very flamboyant gay fellow who was another PR guy, wonderful. God, I can't remember his name now. And they told me we were supposed to go into London, but there were riots going on in Piccadilly's Circus. And I said, what are you talking about? And they turned on the TV, and I remember in my mind's eye, there's a picture of me in that pose that's the Scanners in Piccadilly Square that's 5 stories high. And they showed a guy with blood on his face that was dressed like me. And it was in French, and the guy got all nervous. The neurotic PR guy said, he told me that a guy had taken an electric drill and drilled a hole in his forehead in front of the theater.
I drilled a hole in the head.
Where?
It's kind of obvious. Right here.
And the press secretary went crazy. The very flamboyant guy said, I don't want to do this without any press protection. And I looked at it with this guy with blood all over his face talking in a foreign language. And I went, as much as I want to do England, I've never been there, I'm not going. We're going home. And I came back, I had no money, and I took a job as a bartender at the Jarvis Tavern, Jarvis Tavern in Toronto. When Scanners opened up, I was tending bar. And I got so frustrated. The night it opened in Canada, a guy got angry and threw a bottle at somebody, and the bouncer was already dealing with somebody, and the owner said, you're big, you can look after it. And I remember going over this guy, and I thought, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. And I took the uniform off, and I took the pants off, and I dropped them on the bar. And I said, go at it, fella. I'm out of here. And the owner went nuts, and I left Jarvis Tavern. And the hardest thing for me was it was a half a block away from the National Film Board, where I'd studied for 5 years. And it was kind of a nice wake-up call. I got 53 and change Canadian for Scanners, $5,300 for that part. It's not by any design or deviousness on the part of the producers. I was signed to a one-day character contract, and they just kept adding on it, so I got a bunch of one-day character contract payoffs. The story's been told a few times, and it's true that I was at dinner with Jennifer O'Neill and her husband the day before her last day. We were eating in this Montreal restaurant, and her husband, who was a dog trainer at the time, she later divorced him, and then there was some bleeding going on or something. I think somebody got stabbed. He got stabbed, and the marriage didn't work out, but he trained German Shepherds or something, I can't remember. But anyway, he said, what are you making on this film? And I said, 53 and change. And he said, thousands? And I said, no, hundreds. And he said, a week? And I went, no, for the whole film. And this conversation had come up because he'd asked me, what are you buying the crew for Christmas? I said, buy the crew for Christmas. I'm trying to steal wardrobe and anything I can get my hands on. And that's what he asked me what I made. And I saw Jennifer sort of like look down, and she was all nervous. And I said, and her husband had started choking on his food and was half laughing. And I said, what are you making? To Jennifer, and she went, 50. I said, US or Canadian? She said, US. I said, a week, and she nodded. And I went. And I was grateful for that 53 and change. I think it was 53 or 50, I was grateful for it at the time. But I remember sitting there and just something in my stomach going, and she said, I feel so embarrassed. What can we do for you? I said, you can pay for dinner and let's have another drink. And I remember getting absolutely hammered that night. But that was a wake-up call that stayed with me. I would have been quite happy working in film, writing on the side, writing theater, keeping a second job. I was so grateful to have an outlet for that creative outlet. But when I realized, when Scanners came out and I saw what was going on, and then visiting hours the next summer and stuff, it lit me up. It gave me something I wanted. I wanted, not money, I wanted to play more. I wanted to play with other playmates. I wanted to try things. And that started with Scanners. I think it was my 19th film at the time, but it was the first one that gave me kind of a look outside the curtain, at the world, outside of Toronto, Canada. I think I'll always be grateful for it. Scanners was a very popular film, which was interesting is I followed that with a film called Visiting Hours that was also done by the same company. Pierre David produced that. It was done the very next summer. It actually outgrossed Scanners theatrically worldwide. You got to remember, this is pre-DVDs, pre-video rentals, and everything. That was a burgeoning, kind of beginning industry. So most of the money was made theatrical and for TV sales. In Visiting Hours, I killed, I think it's somewhere between 17 or 13, it's a teen, and up into the 20s, women on camera, not counting men. I played this incredibly damaged and painful character. Those two films back to back, one year and the next, AVCO Embassy directing and distributing down here in the States and over that, I started getting calls. And look, I was told this by an older actor that, he'll go unnamed, that he said, if you kill an old lady with a shovel and somebody makes money off it on camera, right, they don't want you to do anything except kill old ladies with shovels. Now, the old lady may become Elizabeth Taylor or Stockard Channing, and the shovel may become nickel-plated, but they really don't want you to go that far. And that's been the truth. Look, work is work. And I've done it over the years. I've been able to parlay that kind of heavy, grotesque side of the characters I create into making a lot of money and making a lot of room for myself. So I do a large studio picture, or up until recently, where I'm getting older now, I don't get as many opportunities. I'm now playing the grandfather of the killer, I guess. But I've been able to do a very large picture at least once a year or every 18 months. And then I bugger off and do all these little things where I play grandfathers and fathers and priests and psychiatrists and teachers and husbands and stuff like that in lower independent films and stuff, and I have fun. Because as an actor, if it's not fun, I don't want to do it. I mean, if I didn't enjoy it, I wouldn't do it. I'd go off and I don't know what I'd do. In Canada, it's a completely different deal for me. I try and go back every year when it's warm. I've been in Los Angeles since 1980. I came to Los Angeles when I realized, it was after Visiting Hours, the next film I got offered was a film, Bill Marshall and Hank Vandergeld offered me a film called Dreadlocks. And they offered me scale plus 10 to play the lead in it. They were going to shoot it in Canada and Jamaica. And at that time I knew Visiting Hours. I made 37,000 Canadian on Visiting Hours. And it was the highest grossing film in Canadian history at that time. And I said, I think I said to Bill and Hank in the meeting, I said, how can you feel even rationally comfortable offering me that and not know you're insulting me? And Hank Vandergeld, who's now dead, said, if you were any good, you wouldn't be here. What are you still doing here? Because if you were good, you went to the States. And Bill Marshall said, who always told me the truth, he said, Michael, you're broke, and I know you need the money. I said, you're right, fuck you, and I'll see you around, Bill, because he was truth. And I went and packed my bags, and I literally left the next week, came to Los Angeles and started over again. And was working within a couple of months. But in Canada, I really do. I try and go back at least once, if not twice a year, and do something for next to nothing. Unless the piece is absolutely horrendous. But I get offered a lot of stuff. Because I really do believe you got to give it away to keep it. And I have, especially for Quebec and Ontario, those two provinces, I have a great love of the people that have made brick without straw and mortar without lime for so long. I feel an obligation to sort of support them. There's an arrogance when films are successful. There's an arrogance that people look back, especially audiences and distribution companies and financial people. They talk about doing a remake of Scanners, or they talk about a remake of Total Recall, or making a remake of Free Willy, or a remake of Extreme Prejudice, or some of these films by these very iconic directors and stuff like this. The aspect that they don't seem to take is that there's an arrogance there, that they don't look at the fact that if you're going to have a remake of something, you don't have a David Cronenberg, you don't have a Paul Verhoeven, you don't have a Walter Hill involved. Then you're just blowing smoke up everyone's ass. Because that's what this film is the storyteller. If it's not, it's the script, the director, the storyteller. They talk about, I've heard them talk about remaking Scanners a few times. What's wrong with the original?